In this section of the unit on politics of poverty, I'm going to talk to you about the history of development and development aid. We've got quite a lot to get through. Here's an overview. I'm going to start essentially with the background of empires, but more recently with the Marshall Plan, which was the development initiative in Europe after the Second World War. We'll then go on through a series of different approaches to development, which I'll describe in more detail as we come to them. Catch up and so-called linear model, criticisms of that approach and dependency theories, as they're called, the beginning impact of sustainability and what's called alternative development, ways in which countries might approach their own views of what development should be, and the way in which that was interrupted by the recession and debt crisis of the 1980s. And following that, the market-oriented approach promulgated through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the so-called post-development agenda, which to some extent makes allowances for sustainability, to some extent embeds sustainability in the discussion, but also to some extent has been inimical to sustainability, has been of disbenefit to the sustainability agenda. Let's start with the Marshall Plan, which was aid given by the United States to Europe to reconstruct Europe after the devastation of the Second World War. That was a relatively large amount of aid, $160 billion in that wasn't the amount given, that's the amount it would be in equivalent money today. Given to all of the nations of Europe over a period of about 4 years. So it was very time constrained and had specific objectives. The point is it was hugely successful. In a relatively short time, Europe was rebuilt to the level of the economy that it had before the war, and as we know, went on to be hugely successful in economic terms after that. So this was like a beacon as to what you can actually do with the right amount of aid delivered in the right way to other countries. How to do it then? Well, this was the idea promulgated, very popular in the 1960s, of how to recreate the impetus of the Marshall Plan beyond Europe and particularly to Africa, but to other low-income countries. And the idea was essentially to copy the stages of development that Western Europe had gone through. So from a traditional society that was at least satisfying the preconditions of takeoff in the economy, to inject at that point foreign direct investment money into the economy, to allow that community to move from the primary sector of the economy, that's basically speaking raw materials, agriculture or mining, to the secondary sector, that's like turning cotton into cloth or wool into cloth, to the tertiary sector, which is like making garments out of the cloth or making the machinery to make the garments in an indigenous industry. So that industrial development initiated by the input of external funding just at the right point, and the idea that countries could grow in this way. The problem was that the benefits of this were not distributed amongst the whole population. They were captured by the governing elite. And then there was the problem of the oil price shock and the debt crisis, which rather undermined the efforts of these countries to industrialize in this way. And as a result of the failure to industrialize this way, dependency theories gained a certain amount of traction. What do I mean by a dependency theory? Well, the idea is that within any country, you have a centre and a periphery. You have the captains of industry, the government institutions, you have the decision-making bodies, and around that you have the rest of the population, if you like, the small, medium enterprises and independent entrepreneurs, workers, and so on. But things are controlled from the centre. The centre acts as your control centre. Well, the idea was, the concept was, that this is replicated in our relationship with less developed countries. That the developed countries form the centre and the less developed countries form the periphery. And what happens is that those peripheral countries become dependent on the West as the centre, and all the profits flow back to the centre, to the West. So that the lack of industrialisation is a structural problem as to the way we in the West have actually organised things. The solution proposed by dependency theories was to put trade barriers around developing countries and allow their industries to develop within those barriers, to essentially cut them off from global trade while they developed. And that too was hugely unsuccessful because it totally underestimated the problems that countries would have internally in bringing about that sort of industrial development. So there was a move towards thinking, well, if Western models don't work and we can't isolate countries from the world and get them to industrialize our way by that means, perhaps we should look at alternative approaches to development, emphasizing what countries want to do themselves rather than what we think, how we think they should imitate the rich countries. And there was a beginning here to address sustainability issues, so that not just thinking about making everything like the rich West, but addressing the fact that not everyone can, in current technology, we don't have the resources to make everyone like the rich West. Well, the problem that arose there was the 1980s recession, often called the lost decade of development. And the graph shows the source of the problem in the US. What you notice is there are some tall bars and some very short bars. The short bars are good, the tall bars are bad. The tall bars refer to the 1980s. The shorter bars refer to 2009, which is not a particularly good time for the United States, but clearly a lot better than it was doing in the 1980s. And so the attention of the rich world was turned away from a focus on development to their own internal problems. And as I say, this became the lost decade of development. And then development gets going again in a very different way. Because what the developed countries, a lot of developed countries discovered, particularly the US and Britain, was the importance of development in the context of a market economy. There was a great move towards privatization, the removal of the state from a major economic actor towards allowing the market to do very much more. And that mission was taken on by two world bodies, the International Monetary Fund, which lends to countries to see them over any debt, external debt crises, and the World Bank, which lends to countries for development projects. And the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank began what they call the structural adjustment programs, which really means bringing a market-oriented vision to bear on the on development in the lower income countries. And currently there are 187 structural adjustment programs in 64 countries, which brings them back into the world market. It brings them back into the globalized world trade and tries to develop them in a world market. Here's a map of the current, or at least of the World Bank projects currently. You'll see there are 1,709 projects with $177 billion worth of aid or loans at 21,972 locations in 142 countries. There are only 190-something countries in the world, so most of the world has these development projects. And you can begin to get some feeling of where there might be some criticism in that managing that number of projects in that diverse number of environments is a huge administrative overhead and employs an awful lot of non-government organisations, which brings us on to precisely how well does this sort of approach work? How well did it work? How well might we expect it to work? What might we expect to do about it? And that's the subject of the next section.